The mythological world picture. Philosophy evolved in Greece about 600 years BC or before Christ. At the time, people had found answers to their questions in various religions. While myth means a story about the gods, which sets out to explain why life is as it is. We probably knew about Thor and his hammer. Actually, the story about Thor and also his hammer came from Norse myth. So before Christianity came to Norway, people worshipped him as god of fertility. Perhaps for them, myth was an attempt to explain the changing season of the year. Like when winter starts, it means that Thor's hammer is in Jotunheim, but when the spring starts and nature starts to growing again, starts to become colorful again, that means Thor already got his hammer back. A mythological world picture also existed in Greece, when the first philosophy evolving, and it had been handed down from generation to generation. Much of the Greek mythology was written down by Homer and Hesiod around 700 before Christ. So for the first time, it was said that the myths were nothing but human notions. During that period, Greece and in the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Asia Minor, leaving the citizens free to devote all their time to politics and culture. They called this the development from a mythological mode of thoughts to one based on experience and also reason. The aim of the early Greek philosophers was to find natural rather than supernatural, and also explanations for natural process. The next is about the philosopher project. Since some philosophers lived in a different age and perhaps in a completely different cultures from us, but it's important to us to see each philosopher's project. Philosopher wants to know about so many things like how animals and plants came into being, and whether there is a God or whether man has an immortal soul. When we determine what a particular philosopher's object is, we will be easier to follow his line of their thoughts.
The natural philosophers. The earliest Greek philosophers are sometimes called natural philosophers because they were mainly concerned with the natural world and its processes. All the earliest philosophers shared the belief that there had to be a certain basic substance at the root of all change. How they arrived with this idea is hard to say. We only know that the notion gradually evolved that there must be a basic substance that was the hidden cause of all change in nature. There had to be something that all things came from and returned to. The philosopher posed questions relating to the transformations they could observe in the physical world. They were looking for the underlying laws of nature. They wanted to understand what was happening around them without having to turn to the ancient myths. And they want to understand the actual process by studying nature itself. This was quite different from explaining thunder and lightning or winter and spring by telling stories about the gods. Only fragments have survived of what the natural philosophers said and wrote. What little we know is found in the writings of Aristotle, who lived 2 centuries later. He refers only to the conclusion the philosophers reached. So we do not always know by what paths they reach these conclusions, but what we do know enables us to establish that the earliest Greek philosophers' project concerned the question of a basic constituent substance and the change in nature. Three philosophers from Miletus. The first philosophers we know is Thales, who come from Miletus, a Greek colony in Asia Minor. He traveled in many countries, including Egypt, where he is said to have calculated the height of a pyramid by measuring its shadow. At the precise moment when the length of his own shadow was equal to his height. He is also said to have accurately predicted a solar eclipse in the year 585 BC. The next philosopher we hear of is Anaximander, who also lived in Miletus about the same time as Thales. He thought that our world was only one of myriad of worlds that evolved and dissolved in something he called the boundless. And the third philosopher from Miletus was Anaximenes. He thought that the source of all things must be air or vapor. Anaximenes was of course familiar with Thales' theory of water. According to Anaximenes, air was therefore the origin of earth, water, and fire. Nothing can come from nothing. Parmenides thought that everything that exists had always existed. This idea was not alien to the Greeks. They took it more or less for granted that everything that existed in the world was everlasting. Nothing can come out of nothing, thought Parmenides, and nothing that exists can become nothing. He realized that nature is in a constant state of flux. He perceived with his sense that things change, but he could not equate this with what his reason told him. When forced to choose between relying either on his sense or his reasons, he chose reason. You know the expressions, I believe it when I see it, but Parmenides didn't even believe things when he saw them. He believed that our sense gave us an incorrect picture of the world, a picture that does not tally with our reason. As a philosopher, he saw it as his task to expose all forms of perceptual illusions. All things flows. A contemporary of Parmenides was Heraclitus, who was from Ephesus in Asia Minor. He thought that constant change or flow was in fact the most basic characteristic of nature. We could perhaps say that Heraclitus had more faith in what he could perceive than Parmenides did. Heraclitus pointed out that the world is characterized by opposites. If we were never ill, we would not know what it was to be well. If we never knew hunger, we would take no pleasure in being full. If there were never any war, we would not appreciate peace. And if there were no winter, we would never see the spring. He believed that both good and bad have their inevitable place in the order of things. Without this constant interplay of opposites, the world would cease to exist. God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, hunger and satiety. He used the term God, but he was clearly not referring to the gods of the mythology. To Heraclitus, God or deity was something that embraced the whole world. Indeed, God can be seen most clearly in the constant transformations and contrasts of nature. So, in the midst of all nature's constant flux of opposites, Heraclitus saw an entity or oneness, this something which was the source of everything he called God or Logos.
Alright, people, you have heard about how the earliest philosophers go from religion to science in the terms of their philosophy, in their views of everything, of life. And now I will tell you about the last of the natural philosophers. And I will name this section from Avatar to Einstein, and you will understand why in a moment. Alright, the first of the last, not the airbenders, the first of the last natural philosophers is called Empedocles from 490 to 430 BC. According to Empedocles, everything is made out of four basic elements. So he is combining the immutability of Parmenides' view of philosophy as well as Heraclitus' everything changes view of life. And according to him, that both views are flawed because they assume that only one element exists, that everything is made up of only one thing. According to Empedocles, element is immutable. Water is water. Fire is fire. You can't make fish out of just water. You can't make butterflies out of just earth. But he also acknowledges that everything in nature is changing. Everything in nature is perceivably changing. And thus he reached the conclusion that since element cannot be broken down into anything else, but everything in nature, substances, are changing, then of course nature is a combination of multiple elements. Adding or taking away one element will change the whole substance. The example of this is wood. When you add fire to the wood, it will turn to ash because elements are leaving it. But the ashes itself is created out of earth and water, according to Empedocles. So in this case, by adding fire, he releases air and is left with just water and earth, which is ash. So according to Empedocles, there are four elements: water, earth, fire, and air, just like in Avatar, The Last Airbender. So everything is a mixture of those four elements in varying proportion. This idea of primordial elements is a pre-existing concept. It is not original from Empedocles. These elements are joined by forces and also separated by other forces. The joining force is called love, and the separating force is called strife. The next of the last natural philosophers is called Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BC. According to Anaxagoras, substances cannot be created from just one element, so this is a reiteration from Empedocles' view. But Anaxagoras also adds that everything is divisible until it cannot be divided anymore. So part of everything exists in everything else. Why? Because part of you, part of me, part of butterflies and cats and dogs can be broken down into smaller and smaller pieces until it cannot be broken down anymore, which means that dogs and cats and you and me are created by those same parts, from foods that we eat, from air that we breathe, from the water that we drink. This is what it means by something of everything exists in everything. Your food contains pieces of you. Your water contains pieces of you. The air contains pieces of you. And this species is called seed. And they are joined by order, creating a force called mind or intelligence. This is a part where philosophy really moves away from religion and superstition into the realm of science. Specifically, in Anaxagoras' case, is astronomy, because Anaxagoras, he was an Athens, but he was cast away because he was uh, an atheist. He doesn't believe in the existence of God. He believes that sun is not an entity, but a flaming hot rock composed by the same elements that creates the stars and the planets and everything. So it is remarkably close to the scientific truth that we know today. Alright, and this is the atom theory. This is the real last natural philosopher. His name is Democritus, 460 to 370 BC. According to Democritus, everything is made out of tiny eternal blocks. So again, this is a refinement of the way Anaxagoras views life. According to Democritus, these tiny eternal blocks are invisible and indivisible, and it's called atom, meaning uncuttable. You cannot divide it anymore. And this is the origin of the word atom that we use today, even though we as modern people know that atoms are created by subparticles that is actually smaller than atoms. But again, this is a view from philosophers that do not have modern tools, so it is remarkably similar. Democritus says that atoms are indivisible because nature doesn't dissolve. Because if atom can be divided into smaller and smaller pieces, then Democritus says that nature will not have structure, will not have substance. It is also eternal because, looking back 2 slides, elements cannot be created from nothing. Nothing can be created from nothing. It is also unique. Each atom is shaped differently, so they can fit into each other and create substance. Some are smooth and round, some have hooks and edges and corners, and they join together not by any forces that we cannot see, not by intangible concepts like love or order or mind or intelligence, but it is joined because they have to. According to Democritus, atoms and void are the only things that exist in the world. This belief in only material things is called materialism. Democritus is a materialist. Democritus also believes that soul exists. He believes that soul is created from soul atoms, but he doesn't believe in immortal soul. Well, this means that since he's a materialist, he believes that once brain disintegrates, then the soul atoms disperses, and there will be no more consciousness after death. And that is all from me. Moving on to the next presentation. Thank you.
Faith, History, and Medicine. The idea of faith is particularly complicated and prevalent. Many people believe in some kind of order or meaning to the universe. Whether they acknowledge this or not. The latter discusses the role of faith in culture. All human cultures believe in faith in some capacity. In ancient Greece, there is an oracle in the town of Delphi, where the god Apollo would supposedly possess the body of a priestess and allow her to speak in the god's voice. The Greeks had many stories about the role of faith in the world. The famous legend of King Oedipus is about a man whose horrible fate or destiny catches up with him no matter how he tries to escape. But there were also Greeks like Thucydides and Herodotus who tried to use reason and research to explain why wars and large historical events happened. They weren't satisfied with fate as an explanation. Around the same time, the Greek doctor Hippocrates was making similar developments in medicine. Although many Greeks believed that disease was caused by fate or the gods, Hippocrates believed that sickness was a unnatural imbalance in the body that could be modified with the right treatments.